Hi everybody and welcome to Tales from the Hut and Hangar. This is Volume 4, Chapter 2 with Mike Laundy. The last episode started with gliders and also finished with gliders. And as we move on to this one, Mike received a letter.
I got a posting notice arrived, and it was to Germany, to 60 Squadron, flying Pembrokes. And I thought, what the hell's a Pembroke? I never heard of a Pembroke. So I found a directory of aircraft and hunted through it, and eventually I found that a Pembroke was a twin piston engine light transport airplane designed in the late 1840s. It felt like it, the late 1940s.
Yeah.
And I thought, why am I going to fly this? I said, well, you'll find out when you get out there. And they said, but it's all changed. I said, but I've been flying jets. And they said, yes, when you finish training, then we subdivided you to jets and piston engine. And they said, and you were jets. They said, but we've changed the rules now. It's now fast jets and multi-engine.
Move the goalposts, as it were.
Yeah, so the goalposts are moved, and you're now definitely a multi-engine pilot. So, great. So I did the course at Andover, which was quite an interesting course to do. I didn't get on particularly well with the guy teaching me. I had to learn how to fly airways because, of course, I'd never flown in airways before. And I had to learn about flying the airplane for passenger comfort.
Oh, I see.
And so when we came back, my usual thing is to roll half inverted and dive at the ground. Apparently wasn't appropriate for the Pembroke. We were supposed to do smooth flying and not faster than 500 feet per minute for the passengers' ears.
But that come in useful for your later career, didn't it, I suppose?
It did, actually, yeah. And so, anyway, I did the course. Oh, night flying. Great fun.
Oh, right.
There were no lights on the airfield. It was a grass airfield. Paraffin flares.
Oh, that's crude.
So you had one line of paraffin flares, and they ran out a wire to a big sort of lamp, which would point towards the downwind leg. So you'd have some idea where the airfield was as you flew downwind, because you don't get that much light from the
This is out in Germany?
flares. No, this is at Andover,
Oh,
in England.
really? God.
And I was doing the course for it. And I didn't think I would ever be landing on paraffin flares, but I was. And because one of the guys on the course before me, I think, he'd got it slightly wrong. He'd hit the big lamp. It was like a big sodium lamp, which didn't help me for the landing, but he managed to hit it with his landing, knocked one of the legs off his undercarriage and come to a halt, sort of leaning over one side with his wing over the top of one of these burning paraffin flares. And they couldn't get out because the door is on the left-hand side and it opens outwards, and they couldn't open the door. And they had to go through the emergency hatch in the top. But that was before I got there. And so I made sure I didn't actually land on top of the
See why
paraffin.
your mum was concerned.
Well, that wasn't me doing that.
No,
That happened before
the whole
me.
business at the time.
Oh, yeah. And, actually, briefly talking about my mum, when I was on the Victors, I happened to have spoken to her one night and mentioned I think she phoned me, and I said, well, I can't talk for long, so we're night flying tonight. Sadly, that night, there was a collision between a Canberra and a Victor.
Oh.
And everybody was killed on both the airplanes. I didn't even know it happened because it was, it happened miles away from where we were. But it hit the news, of course.
And obviously your mum saw
And
it.
my mother was panicking, trying to find out because, I told her I was going flying, and all the crew are dead, and so I vowed then I would never ever tell her again
What you were doing.
what I was doing. I'd tell her afterwards, but
Yeah.
not beforehand. When I arrived in Germany, which was interesting because there was no sat nav in those days, and I was driving there with a map on the seat beside me as I worked my way around places in Holland. I eventually found Germany.
Is this in a Jaguar?
It wasn't in a Jaguar, no. I forget what I had by then. I think it was... Well, the Jaguar actually went by the wall because I got banned from having it at Cranwell after that incident. And so I spent a couple of months at Cranwell with no car at all.
Oh.
And when I was allowed to have one again, I wasn't allowed to have one exceeding 1,000 cc's. So I got a Hillman Imp, which was bloody awful. But then in my final year, they relented, and I got a Triumph Spitfire, which is more akin to to the persona I would have. Yeah, the image, yeah. So, in Germany, I think it was probably a Corsair or something. It was just... Oh, no, sorry, no, it wasn't. Germany, of course. I got a duty-free car for Germany.
Oh.
Yeah, I had a Rover 2000, brand new.
Well,
tax-free.
That's all right. Excellent result.
Yeah, it was a good result. Yeah, I've forgotten that. So, yes, I found the squadron and introduced myself to the squadron commander. And he said, how many hours have you got? First pilot and dual. And so I think it's about 950, something like that. Oh, he said, that's a shame. You've got to have at least 1,000 hours first pilot and dual to fly passengers. Oh. I said, well, why am I here then? He said, look, go and have a chat with Flight Lieutenant so-and-so, who was a navigator. And so this guy gave me a big grin and took me out to an office in the next door hangar. And we went in there. And I did notice that it had a lot of locks and bolts on the door. God, we've done doing all these things. We went into this little office. And he said, do you recognise what that is on the wall? And there was this great big map, 1 in 50,000 map, with a big chunk of Germany. I said, oh, it's got Berlin at the top of it. He said, yeah, that's East Germany, and those are the corridors to Berlin. And he said, and your job here is going to be flying those corridors, photographing the Russians and the East Germans.
Wow.
Oh. And in fact, it followed on, because we had the same camera fit in our Pembroke as we had in the Victor.
The Victor, yeah.
The only thing was you had to climb through it to get to the cockpit, and you're much more intimately associated with the cameras, and you're much lower when you're using them. And so, yeah, that's what I was doing. I didn't do that all the time. I also did passenger flying as well. But I think we had about 3 pilots and about 6 navigators actually doing it. And at the time, it was very, very secret. And it didn't... I wasn't able to talk about it until the 1990s. Yes, at the time, when I went up to Germany in 1972, then the whole thing about photographing the Russians and these Germans was very secret at the time. In fact, we got authorised directly by the Cabinet Office to do the flights. We couldn't discuss it with anybody. The squadron commander knew what we were doing, and the station commander did, but virtually nobody else on the station knew what we were doing. The other pilots on the squadron didn't know what we were doing, and they were told, just don't discuss it, because obviously they realised we were doing something, but they didn't know exactly what we were doing.
Yeah.
And we tried to persuade the guys who were just doing the straight transport flying not to necessarily fly nicely along the air routes in the corridors, because you had sort of lines to fly along, because we didn't fly along specific lines. We flew where we could take pictures of the
get away with it.
The opposition. And so
were you intercepted at all? Or?
I was eventually.
Pushed it that little bit too far.
Well, no, it wasn't that. Actually, when I was intercepted, I was actually doing a passenger flight, and I had one lady brigadier, army brigadier, sitting in the back, and nobody else on the airplane, just myself and the navigator. And we were flying down the corridor, minding our own business, and the navigator I was with didn't do the reconnaissance flights, so he didn't know. Well, he knew we did something, but he didn't know what we were doing. And I said to him, look, I just don't follow the centre line when I come down here. I just meander around, which I was doing. So I was making the airplane look like one of the reconnaissance ones, and we tried to persuade people to do that. And also, if I flew a passenger flight, then I would make it look like reconnaissance ones, just to confuse the Russians, so they wouldn't know which airplane was actually taking pictures, which wasn't. They weren't supposed to know we're taking pictures anyway, but they would probably guess.
Yeah, I think as I was saying, didn't it?
Yeah.
We're doing the same, I expect.
And a MiG-21 intercepted me, and he was so close I heard him. I was for the whole windscreen filled with MiG-21, sort of little delta-shaped wings, red stars and missiles. As this guy came across my nose, probably about the length of this Nissen hut away. And as he rolled out, his wings sort of waggled. Well, that means follow me. Well, I was doing 140 knots. He must have been doing about sort of 250. So I thought, well, I can't follow him. And at that moment, the American controller for that bit of the corridor came on and said, oh, you've got to contact 12 o'clock going away. And I said, yes, I noticed. Then he said, oh, it's turning behind you. And in fact, there was a Russian airfield underneath the centre corridor to Berlin, and he actually went back and landed at that airfield, so that wasn't a problem. And my navigator then said to me, he said, well, you know what, Mike, he said, I reckon that Russian pilot was just trying to see our passenger in the back to see if she had a real moustache or not, because she did have a slightly hairy upper lip. And if the lady is listening to this by any chance, I do apologise. I don't think she will be, because she's considerably older than me, and if I'm getting on for 80, then I don't think she'll be around. So that sort of broke the ice a bit. And anyway, we carried on, we got to Berlin, and I said, right, it's my turn now. And my navigator said, what are you going to do? Well, the runway at Gatow was right next to the Berlin Wall, and at one end of it there was a lookout tower bigger than the normal ones they had there, so the Russians, East Germans could actually look across our airfield. So I said, I'm going to beat the shit out of that lookout tower. And he said, you can't do that. I said, I bloody can. Well, it's nothing to do with me. Don't be a wimp. So we're getting a radar approach into Gatow, which I'm ignoring because I'm just going low because I'm aiming at this tower. And air traffic, we're getting jolly cross. They're going, ref air, whatever our call sign was, you're below the glide path. You're well below the glide path. Acknowledge. Pull up immediately. Acknowledge. And I just ignored it. Navigator's saying, it's nothing to do with me, mate. It's nothing to do with me. Oh, shut up. And it was really not very good for me to do that with a passenger on board, but fair enough, she was Army. So I came in below the level of I apologise to the Army if they might be listening. So I came below the top of this lookout tower. And at the very last moment, just pulled up over the top of it and had the great satisfaction of seeing the guards go smack in their faces as I went over it. And I come over going, yes!
A small victory.
I landed the airplane, taxied in, and I opened the back door, which is the entrance door of the airplane. It's down the back of the fuselage. And there's one of our ground crew there. A few of the ground crew did know what we were doing with the airplane because they had to service them. And this was one of the guys that was in the know, although this was a passenger flight anyway. And he was called Slim. That was his nickname. He weighed about 25 stone. Yeah. If he stepped in the back of the Pembroke, it fell over onto its tail. We had a pogo stick. We had to stick under the tail so it wouldn't fall over when Slim got in. Anyway, Slim's standing there and he's got a big roll of Clim Wipe. Do you know what that is?
No.
Clim Wipe is a military-grade kitchen roll.
Right.
And it was, being Air Force, it was blue. They had this big roll of Clim Wipe there. He said, here, sir, I thought you might need this. I said, what's that for, Slim? We heard what happened in the corridor. He said, I thought you might want to wipe your arse. Thanks, Sim, piss off.
Yeah, nice one.
Oh, we said, before I go, Wing Commander Ops wants to see the pilot.
Oh, yeah.
I thought he might. And in the distance, the navigator saying, nothing to do with me. But anyway, so I went up to the Wing Commander's office, and being a sort of a proper young junior officer, I knocked at the door, saluted smartly when I went in. I even put my hat on here and saluted when I went in, waiting for the bollocking. And he said, what the hell were you doing in that approach? I said, I was beating the shit out of that lookout tower, sir. Why? I said, I got buzzed by a bloody Russian in the corridor. Oh, did you? Oh, that's okay then. And that was basically the end of it, other than the fact that I had to write up exactly what happened,
I suppose.
But there was a sequel to it. The Air Force complained to the Russians because there was an air safety centre in Berlin which had all 4 powers in it. And they complained to the Russians. And the Russians said one of 60 Squadron aeroplanes went outside the corridor 2 days ago. And so we were just pointing out to 60 Squadron, the next one flew down. It's best not to do that. Or worse, that effect.
Yeah.
And so I spoke to the crew of the guys and the one that was supposed to go outside. And they said, we didn't. We had a target which was fairly deep in East Germany. And we flew it to a mile from the edge of the corridor, which is our clearance when we were flying the corridor and we were photographing, was to go no nearer than 1 mile to the edge of the corridor. And apart from anything else, our charts had printed in them in bold, non-free flying area may be fired on without warning. And we were not likely to go outside the corridor. We had sets of 1 in 50,000 maps, inch to the mile maps, very large scale maps, with the corridor accurately drawn on them and the 1 mile line marked on them. And each of us had one. We had 3 navigators, 3 crew when we were doing that. We had the pilot who had a map. We had the navigator in the front seat who was doing the general navigation with the map. And in the back you had your other navigator who operated the cameras. And he had a map as well. And all 3 of us would agree if we were going to take it to within 1 mile of the edge of the corridor, because we did not want to be shot down.
No.
And some years later, I got a copy of the 60 Squadron history, and that incident was written up in it. But they got it wrong, because I think over the years the story had changed, or it may well have been recorded differently so as not to cause embarrassment at the time. I don't know.
I see.
But it was recorded there that a crew had actually infringed non-free-flying airspace, which is why they were intercepted by the Russians, which was a Russian story, which I don't believe happened because I'm doing it myself. And they made some comment about the pilot who was flying the airplane knew nothing about the reconnaissance stuff and all the rest of it, which was completely wrong. But again, it probably wouldn't have been recorded at the time because it was secret. Then it was all hushed over.
So in some ways, your Pembroke flying was quite exciting then.
It was quite exciting, yeah. We had a lot of fun doing that because we had another task, which was because we had the Harriers in Germany at the time, and so they wanted to know every bit of Germany they could land a Harrier on, whether it was Autobahn, that small airfield, and this sort of thing. And so we would just take an airplane and go for a wander around Germany, and we didn't have to answer to anybody. We just had the German air pilot, which showed us all the airfields, had a big map of the ones we'd gone to, and if it was a nice day, well, let's go and have a day wandering around Germany. So we go on the Pembroke, take the pictures of the various places. And one of the places we didn't have a picture of was Ramstein, the American base. So I said, we need to get a picture of Ramstein. We want to get it in one frame. Well, I had to climb up to 14,000 feet because it's a big airfield to get it all in one frame on the camera. And we didn't have any oxygen, so we just went out there briefly, took the picture and came down again. And then we called up Ramstein can we come and land to get some fuel? And we landed there, and we just had a single survey camera on for those things, which was a fairly small camera in the middle of the airplane. And so we put our raincoats over it so the Americans wouldn't see it if they looked in through the window. And went off to the BX and got butterball turkeys and stuff ready for Christmas.
Blimey. So how long were you flying Pembrokes and that?
3 years.
3 years.
Out there, yeah.
So what was your next move on then?
Okay, I finished that, and then I was told, well, you are supposed to go to CFS next to do flying instructors, but we've closed down CFS because there's just been major defence cuts, and CFS isn't going to be operating. So they said, you've got another good career job.
This seems a reoccurring
it does.
story.
Considering I stayed flight lieutenant at the very end. But I didn't always do what the Air Force would wish in my career jobs. I treated it the way I thought I should treat it, not necessarily the way my masters would. And but it was as CCF's liaison officer for Scotland and Northern Ireland, based up at Turnhouse in Scotland. I thought, well, that's bright, isn't it? Sending an Englishman up to Scotland to look after Scottish schools and the Irish schools. And I was the only one detached. All the other liaison officers for the CCF were based at down at headquarters Air Cadets down south, but not me. I was up in Scotland. I must admit, after a while, I started talking about those bloody people down south, because a lot of people would think of Scotland as a big county in the north of England, and it's actually it's big in its own right. And we had a little incident when I was up there. Not only the CCF, I was also looked after the gliding schools when I was up there, just for admin inspections and things like that. And how was it? Prince wasn't Charles. Who was the next one after Charles? Andrew. That was it. Andrew had done a gliding course up in Scotland, and strangely, the page where he signed for his flight when he went solo had disappeared. And headquarters Air Cadets were a bit peeved about this, and they said, right, we want the boss of the gliding school to come down to headquarters Air Cadets and explain himself. And I knew the guy. He was a very pleasant guy. He's a reservist officer. He was an Aberdeen policeman. And I said, he's not going to come down. I said, if you insist, he's going to resign. Yeah. And then you're going to use a very useful reservist officer who runs the school very well. And you're not going to get anywhere. Mm. And they said, well, it's got to have a proper police investigation. I said, well, I discussed this with him. And he said, he's a policeman, he's done the investigation, and he can't find it. He probably didn't look in his own bureau or something. But apologies again, I'm sure that didn't happen. And so they said, right, well, he's going to have an interview with the AOC. And the AOC's got to go up to Scotland for something or other, and he's going to go up in a Devon with his wife on such and such a date. Get the guy down to Edinburgh for that. And I said, he's running a course at the moment up near Inverness, on the top of Scotland. I said, well, we want him down there. I said, well, in that case, I suggest I give him an air ticket so he can fly down. And there was a lot of grumbling at the other end. Then they agreed I could give him an air ticket. So then I phoned up this guy. Oh, I'm not going down there. I can't do a Scottish accent, I won't even try. But no, I'm not going to do that. I said, look, you enjoy the gliding, you enjoy what you're doing. I said, come down, I'll arrange an air ticket for you and an air ticket back. It's not going to take a lot out of your time. The AOC's a nice guy anyway, and he just wants to have a chat and find out what happened. I said, grit your teeth, do it, it'll be over, and we can go back to normal. So he agreed to come. So he came down, the Sea Devon came in on one engine, because it had an engine failure on the way. And that was funny, because the AOC came up with his wife. And when the AOC was chatting to this VR reservist guy, I was chatting to the wife, and she said, it was jolly exciting. She said, we're flying along. And then when the engine stopped, and I could see the propellers stop going around. And she said, and what would have happened if the other one had stopped? And I said, you'd have landed fairly quickly. I thought, how long have you been married to a pilot?
Yeah, you had to explain that. Good grief.
So, yeah, that was that bit of it. The other very naughty thing I did, I had to go over to Ireland. We had 2 schools in Ireland which I visited. One was in Belfast and one was in Armagh. And this is when the troubles were at their height. So we went in civilian clothes. The cadets were not allowed to wear uniforms at the school. And I had to go down to Armagh to see how they were going on and have a chat with them. I had my sort of sergeant came with me as well to sort out that out. The Air Force gave us a so-called civilian car. It was a Mini, which had originally been Air Force blue, and somebody had hand-painted it white, and you could see the blue coming through the scratches.
Oh, brilliant.
But it did have a tax disc on it. It was taxed, and stamped on the back of it was not to be exchanged for cash, and bolted to the floor was a green fire extinguisher with a an arrow on it.
Oh.
And this was our civilianised car for driving unarmed down to Armagh at the height of the troubles. We went through a few army checkpoints and they waved us through each time.
Stood out a mile.
It did. And somebody has said, there's this little place where they do, you can buy cut glass straight from the factory and it's a really good price. So we decided to do it. This is in South Armagh, which is not the place to be in the military.
No.
But we decided we'd do it anyway. So we went to this place. We went in, and I got some very nice brandy glasses, which my ex-wife has still got. We bought these, and I think we shouldn't be doing this.
Yeah.
And we went back to the car, and you saw people sort of looking at it. Particularly when I got down, my hands and knees was peering underneath to see if there's been a bomb shoved under it. And off we went quickly. I thought, no, that was not worth doing. The stress. But anyway, I got to the school there, and they had a primary glider there. If you know what that is.
No.
It was something we stole from the Germans at the end of World War II. It's what the Germans used in the 1930s for launching glides off hilltops with an elastic band. And it was like a completely open frame fuselage with a seat at the front end and a stick, and then you had your fabric covered wings and tailplane.
Right, yeah.
And
I think I've seen something.
Yeah, and they had a spike sitting down at the front of it, and you put a hoop on the spike, which went out to 2 elastic bands, and you'd have about 10 cadets on each band pull the elastic tight, and behind you had a steel wire which went to a screw which put it into the ground, so it couldn't move. And you had a straight piece of the elastic first of all, which had a piece of string tied to it, which went through a little loop on it, which had a little red ball at the end of it. So as it stretched, the ball would come up towards the elastic. And when it got there, that was the maximum stretch you allowed. Then you could pull the release and twang, and off you go. And you could get up to about 3 or 4 feet and just fly at level. Oh. And as you overtook the pull of it, the ring just dropped off the spike at the front. Well, I did this at Armagh, and I took it all the way to the top and a little bit more as well. And then I shouted, "Now run!" to the cadets. And I suddenly realised there was about 30 cadets in each thing, and they were running across the playing field. And the problem was, because the ring didn't come off the hook at the front, then I was kept flying, and I'm pointing straight at the cricket pavilion. And eventually it did come off, and there wasn't enough room to land it before I got to the cricket pavilion because of the speed they managed to get me up to. So I put it on the ground and deliberately ground looped it, which fortunately didn't do any damage, and I managed to avoid the pavilion. But the cadets thought this was wonderful. But when I got back to Scotland, I thought, it's really rough on these guys. You know, they're not really getting in, or very little, their experience flying out there. They can't fly their own glider. They can't wear uniform. So I spoke to the guy that ran the cadets in their school, and I said, why don't we try and bring them over to Scotland? And he said, oh, well, that'd be fantastic. I said, well, if I write an air warrant, which I wasn't entitled to do, by the way, if I write an air warrant for your entire squadron to come across to Scotland, then they can bring their uniforms, they can wear uniform over at Turnhouse, where I was based. And I said, I'll get them all up in Chipmunks while they're there, because I used to fly the Chipmunk there, very experienced flying. And I said, I'll get them all up in gliders as well, because I also did an RAF gliding course when I was there, so I was a proper RAF gliding instructor as well at that time.
There you go.
And I helped out at the local gliding school at weekends occasionally.
Oh, that's
So that's what I did. I brought all the guys over, they had a fantastic weekend, they all did some flying, they went back very happy.
Brilliant.
The Monday afterwards, I got a call from headquarters air cadets saying, what the hell are you doing up there? We've just got this huge bill for air warrants,
Ouch.
and it appears that you've brought the guys across to Edinburgh completely unauthorised. You've flown them in Chipmunks on a Saturday, and you know perfectly well that the weekend's reserved for the Air Training Corps, and you've flown them in gliders, and you know that's supposed to be for the Air Training Corps as well. So what do you think you're doing? I said, well, put it this way, what are you going to do about it? Well, there's not much we can do about it, is there? I said,
all done
no,
now.
there isn't really. So, yes, we got away with that.
So what year was that, roughly?
When did I go there? That would have been about 76, I think.
Oh, okay.
76.
The hot summer of 76.
It was actually.
Yeah.
Because when I did my primary glider course, which was at Sariston, I think I did it there, then the important piece of kit we had with us was a garden fork. Because instead of keep tethering the glider and moving it back, we worked our way across the airfield while we were doing a course how to fly the primary glider, and the guy behind was standing the fork to stop the glider from moving while you launched it. Then wherever the glider landed, he picked up the fork and he'd work up the glider and stick the fork in again. To our next bit. That was all right until one of the NCOs was with us doing the course as well, who wasn't a pilot. He was one of the liaison officers with the air cadets, or liaison NCOs with the air cadets. And so I thought, great, we've got a real student here. Because the way you taught them to fly the primary glider, you put it on like a tripod on the centre of gravity, pointing into wind. And so the student would go through the effects of controls without it going anywhere. And then you did ground slides with big spoilers bolted to the wing so it couldn't take off, and the stick fixed forward so you could just operate the ailerons with sideways movement of the stick and the rudder.
Oh, okay.
And then you gradually took the stops out and you took the spoilers off until you got to a point where it would just lift off the ground, and all it had to do was keep the wings level, and then it would land itself again. And this guy had done one of those, which was fine. The second one he went to do, and as you said, it was a hot summer that year, and there were thermals kicking off all over the place. As he went along, a thermal kicked off. We got a sudden blast of air from the thermal, and the thing took off almost immediately.
Oh, crikey.
And we could see White Knuckles. He was pulling the stick back as hard as he could, and we go, push the stick forward. And it went up to about 20 feet and stalled.
Oh.
It just went up, stalled, came down, whack into the ground. The wings snapped in half in the middle, and this guy's screaming in agony because it really hurt, really damaged his back. And he's in the wreckage of this glider. And so I said, we can't move him until the ambulance gets. If he's broken his back and we're moving, we could paralyse him.
Yeah.
So we had about 5 of us around him, locking him in place, and he was screaming. He just wanted to get out of the thing. It wasn't going to catch fire, obviously, because it was just a wooden glider. And so we broke open one of the aircrew first aid kits and gave him morphine.
Oh.
And then it took ages for the bloody ambulance to arrive. Well, even though we were on an RF station, because it was only being used for gliding, they didn't have the ambulances available there, so it was the local ambulance had to come. So yeah, and I did actually write a thing on that saying I don't think these gliders are a particularly good idea in the modern age, because they'd had several cadets who'd done a similar thing, but they got away with it because they're more subtle than a sort of 40-year-old sergeant. So yeah, so that was my air cadet tour, and then at the end of that I went back to flying. I went to Central Flying School. So CFS, well, I got the posting to CFS, which I was quite pleased with. It was going to give me the chance to fly jets again. And they sent me off to Finningley, in fact, initially, which is where the refresher flying school was for the jet provost. And off I went for a real fun month, flying Mark 5 jet provosts. They did get me flying formation a bit quick, I thought, considering I hadn't actually flown a jet or flown formation for something like 10 or 15 years then.
Apart from a gnat. That was close formation.
That, yes. Well, I was actually flying in those days when...
Yeah.
But we did it inadvertently, not exactly inadvertently, but we did unofficially fly formation once in the jet streams when I was there, when we had a Tachyval scramble. They scrambled all the transport aeroplanes, and I took off first. And the guy who took off after me, they said, "What are you going to do?" I said, "I'll follow the one in front." The whole squadron finished up following me, and I finished up leading a 6-ship of jet streams, which I flew into the overhead at Wildenrath, and thought, we're in Vic. How the hell am I going to get this lot down? Because I'd never led a formation before.
Oh,
really.
right.
So we sort of sorted it out between us, and one of the aviation buffs who would be outside the gate took a picture of this formation coming across and sent it to us. The squadron commander looked at that, so he wasn't actually up in the formation. He looked at that and he said, "That's very impressive, Mike. Never ever do it again." But anyway, that's a bit of an aside. On the jet provost, I think there's probably my third refresher flight on it was a formation flight, and we came down from that. And they said, "Okay, you can go solo in formation next time." I thought, what? Can I?
Blimey.
I said, "You didn't see inside my head last time because my hand was trying to bank away from the aircraft next to me, so I was so close, and my mind was telling me I mustn't and forcing my hand not to move away from the one that was so close." But anyway, I did it, and it worked okay, and I had great fun. One of the advantages, of course, of all the time I was in the Air Force, whenever I could, I'd get hold of a Chipmunk, and I know go and turn it upside down and things as you do. And so it was not too difficult to get back into doing the aerobatics again. In fact, in some respects, it was easier doing it in a jet than it was in a piston. So having finished my refresher, they then sent me off to Cranwell. At that time, that's where the Central Flying School was based. And we then had the pleasure of about a month of classroom work, which culminated with us giving a lecture. Each one of us had to give a lecture. We had a box of questions, and the examiner would offer us the box. And so obviously it was the various topics one, so we had several exams for it. But you'd have a box, and for instance, like Med, you'd pull one out, and it would ask you to explain either what we call blogs on. Blogs was a student. So blogs on, you would talk to the examiner and the rest of your course, who was all sitting in the room, as though they were students, and explain from a student's point of view. If it was blogs off, then you had to speak for Met as though you're a bloody meteorologist.
Oh, right, crikey.
And I can remember that was quite funny because we had a Navy guy with us who was going to go through CFS, a Navy pilot, and he took his thing out, and it was about adiabatic lapse rates and things, which is terribly exciting. It's how the atmosphere changes with height. I won't go into detail.
Whoosh over my head.
But he was there with a whiteboard, and he started drawing a diagram to show what was happening. We're all cringing because he'd got two important bits of information the wrong way round.
Yeah.
So he was about to prove that black was white. And as he started to do that, he said, that can't be right. Hang on, I'll start again. And the whiteboards we used, you had to use water to clean them. And we had this little water bottle, hand sprayer, so you could spray it and wipe it off. And he picked it up, and he put his thumb over the trigger and set his forefinger, pressed it, and squirted himself in the face. Which was absolutely hilarious.
Yeah, I'm sure it was.
And but what they did is somebody really got tangled up in the ground school. You could have a second pick at getting a different question, but you automatically lost 10% of the marks or something like that. And anyway, after that we started flying, which was much more fun. And I know the first flight I did, I think it was the basic one, which was effects of controls. And essentially the instructor treated you like you were a student and gave you the lesson. And then you'd go up with one of the other students on course who'd also been given the same lesson, and you would give the lesson to each other. So there'd be another two flights, because one would act as an instructor, the next flight the other one would act as an instructor. And then the fourth flight, you would give it back to your instructor, who would then act as a student. And so at the end of that, I went in for a brief debrief with my instructor, who for some reason, which is beyond me, decided to sit on top of a filing cabinet while he was debriefing me. And he said, "You're going to get through." Oh, well, thank you very much. And it was great in a way because it was all very relaxed, particularly sitting on the fire cabinet. I don't quite know where he did that.
Bit weird.
Well, it might have been cool and he had piles. I really don't know.
Yeah, cool metal filing cabinet, yeah.
But anyway, he said you're going to get through. And I thought, oh, great. And I did. And so, yeah. So we went through that course. It was a pretty tough course, actually. You had a lot of things to remember. And
enjoyable, though, yeah.
It was enjoyable, yeah. Yeah, it was nice to go up. You did, part of it was, well, you're being taught how to do things, and then you had to teach it back again. But I had an American exchange guy as my instructor for part of it. And we were coming up to the exercise, which was spinning and aerobatics, which is one of the set pieces for the students. And for that, I had to teach him how to spin the aeroplane. It's quite easy to do it by mistake, but I had to teach him how to do it properly. And you broke it down into bits, and like the entry to the spin, and then holding the spin, and then recovering as 3 separate bits of the lesson. And so I went through these bits, and he did each of the bits until he got to the final bit, which is where I showed him how to do the whole thing, recover, and then he had to do it and recover. But he didn't recover. So I took control and recovered. And I said, well, Bloggs, you better do that again. We climbed up again, and he did it again and didn't recover again. So I'm going, that's not terribly good, Bloggs, I better show you such and such again, which I did, gave it to him, and once again he didn't recover. So I took control. I said, what's the problem, Bloggs? And he's going, geez, I just love spinning. However, although I didn't mind spinning, after about 6 or 7 spins, I was feeling decidedly queasy.
I'm sure you would do, yeah.
And so the Yank then says to me, Mike, you don't look too well. Which is hard to see, so I was wearing an oxygen mask. And I said, I don't feel too sharp then, Bryn. He said, well, shall we go back and land and we can do this exercise again? I said, there's no way I'm going to do this exercise again. I said, I've done the spinning. He said, but you've got to do aerobatics. I said, I can do aerobatics. You sure? He said, you don't look too sharp. I said, I will do aerobatics. Well, the aerobatics wasn't teaching. The aerobatics, I had to show my own prowess at the aerobatics, which was basically to fly an aerobatic sequence. And the one I devised, I started off by sort of diving, getting a bit of speed up, and going straight up, doing about 3 vertical rolls, pulling to the inverted into the display line, and then rolling into the display. That was too much for my stomach. I pulled it up. As I was doing the upward rolls, I suddenly realised I was about to throw up. So I let go of the stick, ripped my mask off, pulled out my emergency sick bag, which I always carried in the knee pocket of my flying suit, and threw up, which was very embarrassing. It's only the second time I'd ever been airsick in an airplane.
Oh, right, after all that time.
Yeah, and the first time I had an excuse for, because it was the day after my 21st birthday party.
Oh, right, so yeah, that explains that one, doesn't it?
And all I can remember was out the corner of my eye I could see Bryn, because the airplane is still pointing straight up, rapidly running out of speed, as he's grabbing for the controls because he's going to be flying it, because I wasn't. And we recovered from that, and I felt a bit better. And we did the aerobatics another day. However, there was a slight sequel to it, or there's a prequel, really.
Right.
Because a couple of flights earlier...
In the same aircraft, yeah?
Yeah, same aircraft, Same aircraft, same instructor. And a couple of flights earlier, they served us up something for lunch in the aircrew feeder, which had this sort of yellowy texture with a bits of tomato in it. And it looked distinctly like vomit. And being a bit of a japer, I deposited some of this in my sick bag, which I always carried in case. And when we went flying, I hid my helmet bag. We had this canvas bag we carried our helmets in. We used to leave that in the office where the ground crew were. Right. So I left that hidden in there. And off I went with Bryn. And when I came back, I said, just play along with this. And I went in there. I was going, oh, God. Yeah. And the guys were saying, sort of making jokes and thinking, oh, you don't look too good. So, no, hang on a minute. I pull this in and goes, full effect into this bag. And they're all looking a bit embarrassed. I said, oh, sorry, chap. Wipe my mouth and that. Then, hang on a minute. That looks all right. And pulled out a bit of this. Oh, yeah, that's great. Oh, there's a bit more in there. And there's this stunned silence. And then, contrary to military discipline, the NCOs started throwing books at me because they realised what was happening as I ran. Well, of course, a few flights later, I now have a genuine sick bag with me. And when we landed, got out, all I could hear was this American, he said, they're going to make you eat it.
Oh, no.
I said, if you say a bloody word, I'm killing you. And he didn't say a word.
Oh, that's good for him.
And I hid the bag inside my flying helmet. And anyway, we checked in, and I went to take the bag out, dispose of it, and the bloody thing had fallen over, and it had emptied its contents inside my flying helmet, which wasn't nice. And I went into the loo, and I rinsed it out with cold water, which is not the ideal thing to do with a very expensive flying helmet. So I rinsed that as best I could, and then I went to the safety equipment guys and said, look, I've had this slight problem. They go, oh, you certainly have, sir, haven't you? They said, well, you can buy a new helmet if you like, 600 quid. This was a long time ago.
Crikey, so that was a lot
It would have been a lot of money. I said, I'd rather not. They said, OK, well, we'll dry it out for you and sort out the electrics on it, and we'll give you a spare. So I had a spare for about a week, and they said, right, your helmet's ready. They gave my helmet. Oh, God, it stunk to high heaven.
Really?
But I pick it up and I put it on, and it sort of formed a seal around my head. And at the time I was at Cranwell, but my family were over in Lancashire, and I can remember driving back one Friday afternoon after I'd finished for the weekend, and my wife said, God, your hair smells awful, don't you ever wash it? So I explained, don't worry about it, but it's vomit. or dried vomit. But so gradually over a few months the smell faded, and it was okay. Yeah.
Good. Much to your relief, no doubt.
So that was the highlight really of my CFS training. But I finished that, and I sort of graduated for that, and I had my B2 qualification, which meant I was a brand new flying instructor under close supervision. All the rest of it.
Okay. And
so the first student I had was a young.
So what were you qualified to instruct on then?
Jet Provost.
Jet Provost, basically.
When you went through the initial part of the course, everybody did the same ground kit. It doesn't matter if you're going to fly the Hawk as it was then, or Chipmunk, or Bulldog, or the Jet Provost. And we were given the choice at the end of the course, or at the end of the ground school training, we were given the choice. Was what you're going to fly then depended.
A silly question, but obviously you can only be an instructor on the actual aircraft you've been trained on. There wasn't like that aircraft size with that amount of power or anything. It wasn't transferable in some way. Sort of.
Oh, okay. So the guys who are going to do the fast jets, they disappeared off then and did the Hawk. The guys who are going to go to University Air Squadrons disappeared off and did the Bulldog, and I did the Jet Provost. But further down the line, once you became an experienced instructor, then you could get jobs where you would instruct on other aircraft later. Okay. As I did later on. I was instructing on the jet.
Probably have a familiarisation of it all, and then you can just transfer those.
Well, your actual skills as instructor tend to improve as you did it. But it's quite good in a way, I think, anyway, to do the basic stuff first, because you were flying with guys who maybe couldn't even ride a bicycle.
That's true.
And trying to get through the course.
Good.
But I do remember with one of my very first student. He, for some reason or other, we used to fly down to Church Fenton, which is a satellite field from Linton-on-Ouse, which is where I was posted to.
Which my dad was based there.
Oh, right, yeah. It was a wartime bomber station. But and we used to fly down to either Elverton or Church Fenton. And I was flying with this guy down to Church Fenton, which meant going across the top of York at about 3,000 feet on the way. And he was not doing too badly, and he called up Church Fenton to tell them we were on the way in. And the transmit button on the Jet Provost was on the throttle. And so we had two throttles. We had one on the left-hand side for the student and one in the middle for the instructor. So you could fly it with your right hand and your left hand was on the throttle. And so he took hold of my throttle and my transmit button to speak to Church Fenton. So if you can imagine now, he's sitting there with one hand on his own throttle, the other hand on my throttle, and nothing on the stick. And I looked at this and thought, that's odd. I hadn't seen anybody do that before. So I just banged my stick across, to hope him realise what he was doing wrong.
Yeah.
Do you know what he did? Nothing.
Really?
So he sat there looking at me in surprise as the aeroplane
And you
rolled.
thought that was quite natural to do
As the
that?
aeroplane rolled up the side of the middle of York, holding 2 throttles, nobody on a stick,
To power on a speedboat.
or a tank or something.
Yeah, a tank, yeah, that's right, yeah.
So that's another story later on on big aeroplanes. Anyway, I took the thing and took it back again. But sadly, he didn't actually pass the course later on. He had a lot more problems later. But so yes, I went through on the Jet Provost side. I finished up after a couple of years as the flight commander on the squadron, or the Foreign and Commonwealth flight. To my sense, I always seemed to be on the Foreign and Commonwealth flight, which meant I had a mix of students. Half of them were British anyway. Yeah. And it's usually a mixture of guys from places like Qatar.
All right.
And either Nigeria or Kenya. And
that was interesting, I'm sure.
It was, yeah.
Foreign students.
They were nice guys. Sometimes the reports you got on them from their home country weren't entirely truthful.
Right. Flowered up a bit, were they?
Yes, to some extent it depended on who they knew back there. But we did our damnedest, and we got, well, I wouldn't say we got most of them through. We didn't get most of our own guys through. We had probably nearly 50% failure rate of the RF students in those days. It was a really hard course.
Yeah.
And they had to learn so much so quickly and do it. We were able to give the foreign students next to I think, as I recall, next to 20% hours. We had, for the RF ones, we had I think it was about a 10% leeway for the course. And what we could do, if somebody who thought might get through but was struggling, you could give him some extra hours to try and get him through over a particular hurdle, and you'd actually pinch 3 hours from one of the guys who's doing quite well.
Oh, okay.
So that you could keep the whole course.
Yeah, that's good.
So you did your damnedest to get. So I'm sure some of them didn't quite think that.
I will just add, in the background is Dave powering up his SC5A, which is, I would say, is atmospheric. But
it is atmospheric.
This is quite nice.
Yeah. Shall we go and fire at the Oster?
Yeah.
That will give you even more atmosphere.
That's too much.
Well, if guys were struggling, which sadly quite a few tended to in the early stages of it, then we would swap the instructors around. We would normally do an instructor change, because sometimes there was a clash of temperaments between the guys teaching and the guys being taught. But we tended to put the more experienced instructors with the guys who would find it most difficult. That could be a bit depressing from an instructor's point of view, because you would keep being given a student to teach who then eventually failed. And for some of the students, they think, well, that instructor, all his students fail. The reason wasn't that he was a bad instructor. The reason he was a good instructor, but he was being given the weak guys just to try and get them through.
It's probably a good thing, though, isn't it? Because people learn differently off different people.
They do, yeah. So it was it was an interesting time. I think one of the more interesting flights I had was with a foreign student. I won't say where he came from, and we were doing night flying. So it's his first night flying exercise. And the idea was you gave them a couple of night flights, mainly circuits and things. And once they were safe, then you sent them off to do a night flying solo. Well, he wasn't safe. Right. Every time he was coming into land, he was getting the airplane low and slow, and I was sort of starting to twitch in my seat, and then taking control at the last moment and hopping it over the hedge to reach the runway. Consequently, I refused to send him solo. But the rest of the guys from his particular country, there was about another 3 of them, all got sent solo by the instructor. And he was really, really miffed by this, because he thought that, I don't know, he thought he was of a higher social status within his country than the other guys. And I said, well, we're going to do another dual exercise. And he just said, I don't want to fly with you. And I said, well, we better discuss this with the squadron commander. So I marched in the squadron commander's office, and the squadron commander was an Australian.
Right.
And really nice guy.
So I'm thinking he's to the point, is he?
And to the point, yes. So I previously briefed him, I'm going to bring in sort of cadet pilot so-and-so in for a chat. So I took him into the office, and he said, fella, you're flying.
Right.
Get out.
Simple, no messing.
So I took him into the briefing room, and by then the weather's deteriorating a little bit. And I said, well, look, what you're going to do, you're going to get airborne and fly us from Linton up to Leeming, and do an approach at Leeming and a touch and go there, because the weather's deteriorating from the south. It's slightly better there. and we can do a couple of circuits there, and then come back here. And I got no, nothing from him at all. He just sat there looking at the top left-hand corner of the briefing room.
Right.
It was sort of dumb insolence, and I thought this is going to be a fun trip. So we went out of the aeroplane, and we got it fired up, and we taxied out, and he took off, and then he was just banging the stick around from side to side when we got airborne, and we were in cloud, and he had this sort of red flashing glow of the anti-collision guide, like reflecting through. And in the right hand seat, my eyes are absolutely locked on the instruments, because I thought any minute now he's going to totally disorientate himself, because he was literally throwing the airplane all over the sky because he was so angry.
Crikey.
And I thought, I'm going to let him get on with it, because I can probably let the airplane get further than he will dare let it go. And anyway, eventually we got to Leeming, and we flew an instrument approach into Leeming, which again he deliberately flew badly. And then the runway came into sight as we came up the cloud, and we come down towards the runway, and about 50 feet from the ground he suddenly pushed the stick forward and dived the airplane into the undershoot, and then just looked at me.
Really?
And I folded my arms with the ground coming up. I'm thinking, how long can I leave this? And we got down to about 20 feet, and I was just about to go when he broke first. He grabbed the stick.
Grief, that was a game of chicken, that was.
It bloody was. He grabbed the stick, pulled it back, and we landed.
Wow.
Got away with that. And from then on, he was like a pussycat. He did
he really?
everything he was told. He behaved.
Crikey.
We had established he was boss.
Good grief! What a story that is.
And we got him through the course.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So he threw his toys out the pram.
He
then
threw his
and
toys.
realised
He threw his toys
anyway.
out the pram. Realised it was going to kill him, and then did something about it.
Wow.
And so he did manage to break the flaps for me one other time, but that was just a thing that happens. Now I gave him a simulated hydraulic failure, and he gets the checklist out, and he was mumbling away as he read the checklist, and he comes. I suddenly heard vaguely, donk, as he put the flaps down. We were doing over 200 knots. He took me totally by surprise when he put
So
them
how
down.
long were you doing this kind of work, and what year, just to remind everybody and myself, what year was this?
77 I started
77,
doing it,
right.
and I was doing it until 81.
Oh, okay. So a few years doing that then.
So yeah, 4 years doing that basically.
So
well, including the training. So
It
the training
honed your
took 6
skills
months.
then, as it were.
In many respects, yeah. Certainly things like formation. Did lots of
But quite
formation.
interested, I suppose, with the different people you're working with.
It was, yeah, and it was very satisfying to get them through. And a course lasted for a year.
No.
And I was quite lucky in a way, because I took 3 complete courses through, right from the end, from the
that's
start
good.
to the end, which was quite nice. One summer I didn't have a course when I was a flight commander. They said, "Oh well, what are we going to do with you for a month to the next course rise? Do you want to go across and be attached from the other squadrons?" So I said, "Not really." I said, "You've got some chipmunks coming here for experience flying. Why don't I run that?" So I spent a very pleasant month in the summer flying chipmunks.
Going by what we spoke about before, is that they seem to. You missed out because of defence cuts. You never sort of really where you wanted to go. They suggested something, and you manipulated them every time into something that would suit you. So
More or less.
I think you
Yeah.
got it pretty
Yeah.
sus there.
Yeah.
But go back to your favourite chipmunk, innit?
Well, it
Right.
was. And anyway, of course, arrived and started flying. And by that time, I had an American exchange officer, who again I better not name, arrived on my flight. And he was supposed to have been an exchange officer with the Central Flying School. And they said, he's useless. Put him on one of the squadrons. So he was a nice guy. He wasn't, probably not the best instructor in the world, but he was okay.
Yeah.
That he probably wasn't the standard they wanted to teach instructors. And so anyway, I said to him, look, why don't you come with me in a chipmunk? Because we had to take the chipmunks back to Abingdon, I think it was. Or we have one chipmunk to take back. And I said, it's Farnborough on this weekend. I said, if we fly down to Abingdon, we can see what's going on, see if we can get ourselves over to Farnborough.
No, that's all right.
And we'd got a couple of tickets for it as well. So we flew down to Abingdon, and when we got to Abingdon, he said, well, let's go to Upper Hayford. And so one of the guys there drove us over to Upper Hayford, and we sort of blagged our way into Upper Hayford, which is American, of course, in those days. And they said, right, we'll go to the bachelor officers' quarters. So we went there, and I was booked it, because we're in flying kit. We didn't have enough room in the chipmunk for anything else other than our flying kit and sort of razor blade. And so we spent the night in the the bachelor officer accommodation there and had a few beers with the Americans the evening before. And then we were sniffing around the next morning to see if there's anything going to Farnborough. And they said, "Oh, we've got a bus going to Farnborough." So, oh, great. So we jumped on that. And any spare seats? Yeah, we got a couple of spare seats. So we grabbed the seats. And we thought, oh, there's about 5 or 6 more spare seats, and there's plenty of room in this bus. It stopped at a little American radar site, and some more people come out. Oh, we thought, oh my God, we're going to be dumped at a radar site in the middle of nowhere. Luckily, it didn't quite fill up. And we got to Farnborough, and we went into Farnborough, and we discovered that both of us, that it was quite handy being in 2 different nationality uniforms, because I was going up to guys with RF aeroplanes and saying, well, this is my American pilot buddy here, can you have a look around? Oh, sure, yeah, and we'd get in the airplane.
So what year was this, about 77?
This would have been about, no, it's a bit later than that, this would have been about 79.
Well, it's really funny because I went to a lot of Farnboroughs in the late 70s.
Yeah.
So I'm probably there at the same time. But the reason I was there was my brother-in-law's auntie run hot dog stands.
Oh, okay.
And I was the porter going from between all the stands.
Oh, right.
Didn't do any work, mind.
Yeah.
But I remember being there on my first one, going on the Gulf Air TriStar that was there, and all kinds of things, just like on the private days, so you could just roam around where you wanted. So yeah, it's probably around there that time I went.
Well, we got to the stand, but I think it was the F-18, which was and it was brand new then.
Ah.
And sadly, it actually crashed a couple of days after Farnborough. The pilot got out all right.
Oh, right.
And I was chatting to the guy there, and he said to me, "Oh, hop in the cockpit." So I'm sitting in this brand new bloody American fighter.
Excellent.
Not being a fighter pilot, anything, thinking, God, how do they cope with all this lot? And so I asked him a few silly questions, which he answered okay. After a while later, did I drop a chronograph or something which caused it to crash? But I never did know that. I don't think I did. And of course, we're still carrying our bone don'ts with us because we couldn't leave them anywhere. And he said, look, up on the hill behind, you've got all these sort of luxury tents and things. And he said, you've got the McDonnell Douglas tent up there. He said, tell them, I can't remember what his name was, tell them I sent you up.
Okay.
So we go up to this tent and said, we've been chatting to your test pilot down there, and he said we should come up here and get a beer. Oh, welcome. They said, yeah, come in.
Oh, brilliant blagging that was.
So we went into the tent, and they rolled up the front of it. We had an armchair and of course we weren't going to be doing any flying, so we had beer and
VIP
wine
treatment.
on order. Lovely meal, because we were talking about the hot dogs, but we had a really nice meal up there.
Yeah, a lot better than hot dogs.
While we watched the display.
That's nice.
Which was great. We then had to think how we were going to get back to Little Orleans. So we managed to hitch a lift to the nearest railway station. I can't remember which one it was now. We had a rail warrant from somewhere completely different to get us back. And we went to the ticket office and said, look, we've been doing a display at Farnborough, but our airplane went unserviceable, and we got the warrant from the wrong place. Can you do that? Oh, yeah, of course I can, gents, he said. And so he gave us a couple of first-class tickets to go back on our warrant.
So that was a good jolly then.
It was a pretty good jolly, yeah.
Yeah, not bad.
Some of the best blagging I've ever done.
Excellent. Good work. But handy having an American with you, so opened up the world.
It was. Well, it worked for both of us, you know. So, and it gave him a chance to fly a tail dragger for the first time.
Oh, yeah.
Badly. Well, not flying it, but landing it. So, anyway, I've finished my tour there. To be honest, the Jet Provost behaved really well. I didn't really have any sort of major frights with it. We had a fright in the squadron when the crash alarm went one day, and they said, Jet Provost on fire, returning to the airfield. And we thought, oops. Everybody dived outside for 2 reasons. One was so you can run out of the way if it's coming towards you. And the other one is the Air Force tradition is that if you see an airplane crash, you don't have to sit on the board of inquiry. Right. But nothing happened. It was a fairly miserable day. And all of a sudden the fire engine shot off, and they saw them going out down the runway towards on the crash gates. And so they realised that was a great pool of black smoke just beyond the end of the runway. Because they got airborne, got a fire warning. There's a instructor and a student, and then the instructor sent out a quick call saying they're on fire, turning back to the airfield, and then the fire's gone out. No, we're not. Bang, bang. So they're both fine. They were found sitting in a farmhouse drinking tea with the farmer's wife. And the other one we had there was, in fact, just before I became a flight commander, my predecessor as a flight commander went up with one of his students, and it was a miserable day. It was absolutely pouring down with rain. The cloud base was So it was about 800 feet, and the cloud tops were about 20,000 feet. And you couldn't really do a lot, but he was doing instrument flying with one of the guys. So he thought, well, instrument flying, we'll fly through cloud and we'll get up on top in the mid-20s and do it. So he climbed up to about 25,000 feet. We didn't go that high when we're teaching instrument flying, because the airplane's a bit more difficult to handle when the air gets a bit thin up there. And anyway, he decided to give the guy a failure of his main artificial horizon, which was quite easy to do. You could cover it up. You could take your flying glove up and cover it up. Or you could do a barrel roll and press the erect button on it. So as you went around the barrel roll, it would erect to a false horizon. And that was a good way of doing it from the point of view it was giving completely erroneous information to the guy flying it. But it wasn't a good point of view in the fact that you no longer had an artificial horizon working accurately. And so the student was unable to recover without the artificial horizon, and they went into the cloud tops at about 20,000 feet.
Right, so disorientation.
And John, who was flying it, couldn't recover it either. And they reckon what happened afterwards was that you used the turn needle, and the idea was you rolled away from the turn needle, and as the turn needle started moving, you centralised the stick, and then you either pitched it down if your altimeter was going up, or pulled it up if your altimeter was going down. You gradually refined it until you were flying straight and level. But they reckon he went into a tight spiral dive as it was going down, and the G-forces locked his turn indicator, so it stayed up against one stop. And so the manoeuvre we think he was doing was doing a spiral and doing rolls through the spiral as it went round. And he just couldn't get the thing he just couldn't do it. He just couldn't get it to come out at all. All his training just didn't work. And so I think it was around about 5,000 feet he told the student to eject. And he said, after this student didn't do anything. It's like, what? So he said, I tried to eject, and he pulled his seat pan firing handle, which is the standard one to pull, and he pulled it, and his seat didn't fire. The student realised that this guy's seat hadn't fired, so the student then fired his handle, and out he went, and the canopy came off, and out went the student. And he said he was in the cabriolet version, with it very, very noisy, doing God knows what speed, with the rain hammering in, and he tried to pull the top handle, and he couldn't get to it because the buffeting was so great. He couldn't get the grip on the handle, and his hands were just being battered around. So he went back for the seat pan handle again, but he'd pulled it out of its housing, and it was lying on the floor underneath the seat with its cable on it. And he said, I scrubbed around on the floor, found it, gave it a great jerk. Seat fired, and he was still in cloud as he came up the airplane, followed by an almighty bang as the airplane hit the ground. A blast of hot air from the explosion, which popped his chute open, and he landed,
How close was he when he banged out then?
Very close.
Yeah, God.
They reckon he was outside the parameters for survival ejection, but the shockwave of the airplane hitting the ground just popped the chute enough for it to
break him,
open fully and put the brakes on.
God, what a story.
So he was quite lucky.
Oh.
Yeah.
Did they review their procedures from that onwards?
They did, actually. They went up and played with it. I think CFS went up and did some experimenting with the airplane. And they found, it was possible, if it was a little bit of a delay before you recovered it was possible for the G to build up and knock the thing over. So they then added to the recovery thing, push forward until you get the G down to 1 or less.
Well, again, all this went on, so it makes it all safer today, don't it, really? It's lessons learned and evolve on. So. And the
only really interesting I had there was, you remember before I was talking about spin and aerobatics. Well, the students got pushed very hard in the course. And for instance, when I learnt to fly, I did 30 hours on Osters and got a private pilot's licence. I certainly hadn't done aerobatics. Well, for the students on the Jet Provs at 28 hours flying a jet, they then had to do a spin and aerobatics check, so they'd be cleared to do solo aerobatics. So it's just an example of the difference between, going through as a civil pilot, if you like, and going through the military. The military, it was push all the time. They expected you to go solo within 10 hours on a jet, even if they've never flown anything before. And by 30 hours, they're expected to be flying aerobatics by themselves.
Is that the same in a lot of air forces, or?
I don't know how the other guys work, really.
Just wonder,
But I know the American Air Force works slightly different because in the UK you live with the UK weather. So guys learn to fly in clouds.
Just over Nevada, aren't you, all the time, whatever, doing the same
American, I was chatting to the American stars. I don't know what it's like now, but apparently they put them into... Radar takes them into a block of air, which is theirs. And they don't put anybody else in the same block of air because they've got all the room in the world and much better weather. So it's easier to teach somebody than for them to go solo because you're not looking out for their airplanes all the time.
Yeah.
But you've got to pick that up sometime.
Yeah.
Because later on
you're
going to have to do
isn't
that.
it?